So I wanted to invite one of the steering committee to come and offer us a blessing.
As we gather here for the last evening together, I send blessings, we send blessings to all the spirits of the land, all the critters, all the Lotus sisters who couldn't make it tonight, and to all beings everywhere. May we all find wisdom and understanding.
Thank you. See if I make sense. I'm feeling a little sick tonight. Oh, no, just nauseous and a little dizzy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I was looking at my notes and I was like looking and looking. So, we'll see. I wanted to talk about a beautiful subject though, so it's such an inspiring subject, which is equanimity. Because it's so beautiful, because it's the gateway that holds these two different practices that we've been doing. Hold on a moment. One of the gateways is our mindfulness practice, and the other is our loving kindness practice. And they meet in equanimity. So equanimity is one of the mental factors that is part of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And it's also the 4th of the divine abodes. So with the 7 factors of enlightenment, it's said that the factors are pulled into being from the practice of mindfulness. And then as they're pulled into being, we can actually look at them and begin to actively support and grow and balance them, which is also mindfulness's job. And the 7 factors of enlightenment are mindfulness as the leader and conductress, in our case, of the factors, and it pulls into being investigation and energy and effort, energy-effort, that expression, and joy, and then also calm, concentration, and equanimity. And it's said that through practice and life experience, when these factors come into balance, like a kind of perfect balance, and that can be in a moment, just like that, or it can be through practice, that when all those energies come into balance, the mind opens into the unconditioned. So the 7 factors of enlightenment. And what's beautiful about it is, when we look at the Eightfold Path and we look at our journey, so this is going to karma and effort and the practice of mindfulness. Every moment of mindfulness is building the 7 factors of enlightenment, because mindfulness pulls them into being. So you can't lose. And then there are the 4 divine abodes. So the first divine, because when love is unconditional or loving kindness or kindness and friendship are unconditional, they become divine. So the first expression of this capacity we have to be unconditionally friendly is called loving kindness, and the second is compassion. The third is experiencing joy, and especially appreciative joy for others' strengths and successes, and here in the West we talk about our own, include our own as well. And then, because that's important for our culture, for us and our culture. And then lastly, for equanimity, a heart that is so open in friendship and caring that nothing disturbs it. It's always open. So this factor, and there are several expressions of it, is something that lives inside of us, and we can cultivate and strengthen and grow. So I wanted then to just read a couple of different expressions of equanimity. This is from a book that is called Daughters of the Emptiness. And this poem is from Dai Quan, who lived in 1820. And at the age of 17, she entered a convent in nearby Yingzhou in China. And later she began to read Buddhist texts. And she acquired a reputation for her spiritual discipline and insight, and became a teacher and attracted many disciples. So nice to know about her, Dai Quan. This is so beautiful. Two expressions that she has, interestingly, one in terms of love and the other in terms of the seven factors. You've been earnestly studying the way year after year, and now no longer cling to either existence or non-existence. But having come home, you should not just sit around, but instead go out and till the fields of merit for others. The expression of love. 80 years and 8, no craving and attachment. Let's go on back home. When the water clears, the moon appears. This is someone that I read a lot because he's so inspiring to me. Philip Simmons, who was a professor and also a very devoted member of the Unitarian Universalist Church. And he contacted Lou Gehrig's disease and started writing about it. This is what he says. He died in July of 2002 at 45. My wife and I drove into Boston to meet with my doctors at the hospital. I wasn't supposed to enjoy the day, but as it turned out I did. On the drive down, I took in the brilliant fall colors against the blue sky. And I especially liked the chance to get out in my wheelchair in the city, rolling up and down the narrow streets of Beacon Hill. These days when I'm out in the city streets, I have the extra pleasure of being greeted warmly by drunkards and the homeless. I suspect that the wheelchair catches their eye, that I'm simply a spectacle, a change from the usual passerby. But I also sense they recognize me as kin, and I find myself happy to be welcomed into the family of the marginal and the maimed. As my wife and I waited at one intersection for the light to change, a man staggered towards us through 4 lanes of traffic. He was a sight himself, with his shirt half unbuttoned and twisted sideways, his badly shaven head and bulbous red nose. He stopped short of reaching us, standing well out into the busy street, and stared. He pointed a finger at the side of his head, making a disbelieving, "Am I crazy?" gesture, and then said, "Are you guys all right?" I assured him I was, then I suggested he get out of the street so that he would be too. At other times in my life, such a man would have had my defenses up. More recently, it seems I've had less to lose, and so instead could find myself moved to discover that no matter the illness and suffering of his own life, this man at this moment was concerned for my welfare. You see, we really are all in this together. There are times when the fact that we inhabit different bodies, or have lived in different centuries, or that some of us have died while others live on, or are yet to be born, seems a trivial difference compared to what unites us and abides. Our journey takes us to suffering and sorrow, but there is a way through suffering to something like redemption, something like joy, to that larger version of ourselves that lives outside of time. So beautiful. Just going to take her. So I wanted to give some traditional definitions of equanimity. It's said that it is a mind that is unmovable in the face of changing conditions. Its function is to see equality, and it's manifested as the quieting of resentment. Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's for those of you new, an author and translator of a great deal of Buddhist texts, translated as the middleness or the quality of evenness. When it is fully developed, it's said that our minds become unshakable like a mountain. And when I read the list of mental factors last night, don't know if you remember me reading neutrality of mind. So equanimity also means neutrality of mind, and there in the middleness. And it said it's not a neutral feeling, but a mental attitude of balance, detachment and impartiality. It has the characteristic of conveying consciousness and the mental factors evenly. Its function is to prevent deficiency or excess, or to prevent partiality, like a charioteer overlooking her horses as they progress evenly down the road, and it quiets resentment and desire. This is also from another Buddhist nun from the Therigatha. If your mind becomes firm like a rock and no longer shakes, in a world where everything is shaking, your mind will be your greatest friend, and suffering will not come your way. So beautiful. So then I wanted to just sort of pull together one aspect of one of the ways that we develop equanimity and then go through some of the traditional challenges that it said equanimity faces in our lives and some of the antidotes. And did I put that on? No. And so as we talk about this unshakable capacity, then we're really asking, well, how do we hold the places where we're in suffering? How do we hold the places where we get triggered? And we've been just beautifully exploring that together as a community. And so, just to mention it again, because it feels like we learn it over and over. And the first step that I found indispensable is to acknowledge that wherever I am for a good reason. That is that however much I'm suffering and caught, however much I might be in a loop of thinking that goes over and over again, it's happening for a good reason. And that that's another way to say no blame and judgment, no shame. That, and I want to bring it back to the First Noble Truth and what the Buddha said about suffering. But he said it in a particular way, and you all have heard me say it in this way too, which is that as human beings living in the context of oppression, so I'm talking about how ignorance manifests itself in our generation. There is no way we could not be wounded. That would be an impossibility. So we acknowledge that we come to the practice as wounded beings. And that means that different things in our life, both internally while we're meditating or externally, are going to trigger that wound. So I'm just going to use the oppression language. One of the ways that oppression keeps itself in place and keeps the dynamic in place is blaming the victim. And because the victim is blamed, because the conditioning process that we all go through of negativity in our target locations as women, as queer women, as trans, as gender variant, as poor working class or disabled, as old or as young, as physically challenged, as mentally challenged, as immigrants, just to name some of them, as working class and poor, we're blamed for that location. Just being a woman means we receive negative messages about ourselves, and we're blamed for those negative messages. So, for example, in South Africa, apartheid was I want to go to the top example because it just came up. Women weren't allowed to vote because they were considered hysterical and too emotional. Well, who wouldn't be emotional in a context where you had no voice and you were your husband's property, right? So for the very condition, they were blamed, and then that blame justified inequity. That's just one classic example. The other is rape. You were asking for it. Even when, of course, we weren't doing anything of the kind. We were asking, and then we were blamed for it, for the action. And so, just to acknowledge the impact of however many years we've lived with those kind of messages, how could we not then carry these places that that express themselves in a lot of shaking, or a lot of reactivity, because there isn't anything calm and peaceful and beautiful about that whole process. It is just the opposite. And so when we talk about equanimity and cultivating equanimity, then we're really talking about, well, how do we address oppression internally? And of course there's all kinds of important conversations of how we address oppression in our communities and in the world. But just for now, the way then to build equanimity around this dynamic is, of course, my mind is in reactivity. Of course. That we would have to be dead or fully enlightened for there not to be reactivity. Right? So of course my mind is looping. Of course I can't get out of the loop. Of course I am dissociated. Of course I am acting out in all the ways I act out. So the first meeting is one of acknowledgement and acceptance, given the environment in which we live, of course. So, for example, I was experiencing, perhaps like you at moments, a great deal of ease and subtle sensations and joy, and it was very pleasant. And then just in the next moment, this just intense contraction arose with sort of, there wasn't any visual memory, but it felt like it was just, I don't know how to describe it, but my mind couldn't hold it easily, and I could see that my whole mind was moving into dissociation. And then it was that, like, here's the moment of, bhaga, there's pleasant, the impermanence of pleasant, and here is the lifting of what next is arising. In the meditation practice, this is called the purification process. Wherever there's an opening, where the mind opens, at some point that's going to lift up what next needs to be purified. So here it is. And so it's like, instead of going into shame or blame, one has the opportunity to say, of course. Now, I want to just emphasize so much that the way we receive these messages of not being good enough, of not being visible, of not being deserving of respect, of all the messages we've received, that we've internalized, is always with judgment, shame, and blame. And so we're going to hit those experiences and we're going to feel them. Shame, blame, and judgment always arise with wounding, because that's the dynamic, that's how ignorance is greased in this culture. It's a form of hatred. So we're going to experience those things. The trick is to understand, of course those energies are going to arise. I don't have to believe it. And so the second step is being vigilant about dropping the storyline, because that's locking that whole dynamic in place. So dropping the storyline, whatever the storyline is. So I don't know if there is anything mythic. I think I'm thinking of Odysseus, which I had to read at school and I hated, but it's funny how it still stays in my mind. But there was at some part where on his journey of liberation, he meets this monster and he takes his sword and beheads her, it was a her, which is totally typical, and the head grows again. And he's like cutting the head and the head grows again. That's us with the storyline. You know, we drop it and it's there again. And we drop it and it's there again. And then after a while, we become a little disheartened. But don't be disheartened. Because at some point, after a number of beheadings, it actually stops growing another head for longer periods of time. So it just takes a tremendous effort and determination, and that's what right effort is. And that's when the Buddha says at some point, you just grit your teeth. Like he's just saying, you just do it, you know? So you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. So I remember, I don't know if I should tell the story. No, I won't, because it's being taped. I'll think of another story.
Do you want me to turn off the tape?
No, probably. I'll think of another story. I was thinking about another teacher. I was thinking, I don't have to go into the story about another teacher. The classic place where I practice is when I separated from my ex. And we separated, and it was really an amazing separation because I'd done a 3-month retreat at home and she'd gone to IMS. And she came home and we had a week of just this really incredible renewal of our love. We'd been together for 13 years. And I just could not go to sleep with her. We had 2 rooms. I had my study. She had her study, and then we had the bedroom we shared. I couldn't go to sleep with her. I don't know why, but I would go to bed. I felt very loving, but I could not sleep with her. And I was like, honey, I can lie next to you and then go to my bed. And she came out of that retreat and said, if you can't sleep with me, that's it. I'm sorry. That's it. I've just had enough. It was like just, there you go. And we went to therapy and we were very diligent in sort of trying to work through our difference, and there was no capacity to do that. And so she moved out. And I was like, I just can't believe, so I went to the store, I just can't believe that she couldn't stretch, around that after all these years, and I would be cut. I just can't believe, cut. And at some point, the storyline dropped, and there was this just incredible grief. And that's what was feeding all those thoughts, that just incredible repetition of thoughts. It was this amazing grief and loss. So that's the process. We can't access the feeling until we cut the storyline. It might be that before we can even access the feeling, life, it's a trip, isn't it? Nausea. Before we can even access the feeling, for some, especially early trauma, we first access the defense of not wanting, or aversion, or self-hatred. Or just that kind of like locked down feeling that we've also talked about here in the group sharing. So then we're like, oh, here's the lockdown feeling. Here is not wanting. Here's the aversion. That's there first. And then, as we acknowledge and allow the aversion, over time, the next layer will come through. And then we have this capacity to touch in with the feeling. One more statement about that, which is when we're working with difficult emotions, sometimes we want to become an engine, like, okay, here's the feeling because I want to get rid of them. Not that, we know better in the back of our mind, but really there's still some aversion driving it, and so it feels really important to touch in to the feelings and then give the mind something neutral as well, to keep on creating a container in which to hold difficult feelings, because otherwise it can become really exhausting and we can lose balance. And so in building equanimity in this process means even when we feel like, no, I'm okay, I'm holding this, actually it's more skillful to back off and to go to a neutral place, like whatever is neutral for you, because different things might be neutral for us. It could be sound, it could be loving kindness, it could be just opening your eyes and looking outside the window. For me, it's maths problems. Like if I really want to give my mind a break, I can get totally absorbed in subtracting 200 from 5,075. 200 from 5,075. I'm terrible at maths. Here's the 5, I take the 5. So just to give the mind a break, to rest it, and then to come back in. I have found that works extremely well. And actually now, when you train as a teacher in this tradition, you have to do some training in somatic experiencing, which is where this particular technology has been developed, because we found it to be so helpful in working with difficult emotions. So backing off and resting the mind. And don't be so eager to come back quickly. Wait until you really feel rested. And I remember, and this is even before there was any somatic experiencing, on my early retreat days, I did a retreat with Christopher Titmuss, and I was having a really hard time. And he said, go into the hills and sing. That was such good advice. We know, that's why we sing in churches, because singing is so uplifting, and it just changes the energy so easily. So even if you don't sing publicly, to go and sing privately. If you are a singer, what a wonderful thing to be able to do. So that's the technology for it, within our meditation practice. As some of you have heard the story of Deepa Ma, who was considered a fully awakened being, a poor, uneducated woman who moved with her husband to Burma. And her husband died first, and then her eldest child, and that was so heartbreaking for her because she hadn't been able to give birth for 20 years. She got married as a young teenager. And in India, that is considered grounds for divorce and separation. And she even pleaded with her husband to divorce her because she felt so bad that she couldn't give him a child. But he actually loved her. It was an arranged marriage, bless you, and refused to divorce her. And so when she did have a child after 20 years and then lost her child, her heart was broken, her husband dying before that. And she was in bed for 7 years in grief. And the doctor actually told her that she was going to die and that her last hope was to go to a meditation center. She was so sick that she had to crawl up the steps to the meditation center. And I'm telling you the story because after practice, realizing, her mind awakened fully, she was invited to teach at Barry, at Insight Meditation Society, and Joseph was walking with her down the road to a pond, very in the fall, and there were the just exquisite fall colors of the trees around the pond, and Joseph said, "Isn't this beautiful? Just how could you, there isn't really anything to compete with this." And Deepa Ma said, "My mind." And Joseph said, "Well, what's in your mind?" And she said, "Just equanimity, loving kindness, and awareness. That's just all in my mind." Yeah. So just the possibilities, even with tremendous suffering in our life, what one of us as a woman is touch. So then the traditional, I don't know if I want to go through them because I don't have that much time left. So, let me just mention them. The traditional challenges to equanimity are praise and blame, pleasure and pain, gain and loss, and fame and disgrace. So, this praise and blame. We all know what that feels like, right? I had a mosaic teacher who really loved my mosaics, and I felt so expansive and and creative with her. And then I went to another class, and that teacher totally ignored my mosaics. She would actually go and give advice to everyone else except me. Every single class. So, and I would notice how disheartened I would feel. So praise and blame. pleasure and pain. We all know, we've talked about that a lot, pleasure and pain. I actually have I think something written about it. This is what the Buddha said in the Anguttara Nikaya. Just as a rocky mountain is not moved by storms, so sight, sounds, tastes, smells, contact, and ideas, whether desirable or undesirable, will never stir one's steady nature whose mind is firm and free. Whatever we are hearing, tasting, smelling, whatever contact there is, pleasant or unpleasant, the mind is not stirred. That's so beautiful, isn't it? I love that. Just that profound openness. And then I wanted to honor, before I read Thich Nhat Hanh's beautiful poem, I want to honor the, in terms of equanimity as an expression of loving kindness. The practice, and Rhea taught me this, the practice of taking the other side. It is a really beautiful practice when there is some kind of conflict and our equanimity has been disturbed. How to take the other side. We need to take our own side first. But then how do we take the other side? This is what, how can we put ourselves in everyone's shoes? Classic working on it, you know, Thich Nhat Hanh did a lot of work on this. That our hearts, because I have to end because the time is coming up, that our hearts, that we work on it, you know, on everything that comes up in our life, no shame, no blame, we work on it, until we can say, call me by my true names. Do not say that I'll depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. Look deeply. I arrive in every second to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with wings still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and the death that are all alive. I am the mayflower metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond, and I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all sticks and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant, selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart, not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands, and I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm, it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain, like a river of tears, so full, It fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true name so I can wake up, so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. So I think maybe that's enough. Let us see if there's really there's a lot more to say. Maybe just because it's a Dharma talk on compassion, just to say that the opposite, that the near enemy of equanimity rather is indifference, and that I think because it feels important to acknowledge that one of the places that most expresses itself in the nature of privilege in our non-target location, that it's a place where we are unconsciously indifferent a lot. And I was looking at my own privilege in terms of colonialism and the how desperate the Nigerian gay community is, because if you are outed, you're automatically imprisoned, and imprisoned for a long time. And I know that that's been happening in Kenya as well, Kenya and Uganda. And it's just thinking of the safety, relative safety, it's relative safety here in this country compared to what's happening with some of our gay communities in other parts of the world. And how the comfort we have sort of just like cotton wools the heart to suffering, and how it distances it. And kind of blankets, the sort of covers that awakened sympathy that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about so beautifully in terms of actively holding what's happening. And we can't address all suffering everywhere in the world, but there's something about actively carrying it, you know. So okay, let's sit for a moment. Thank you.